In the 70s, the mob had a very strong presence in New York City.
We were untouchable. I didn't feel New York was mine for the taking. I thought we already took it.
They had judges they put on the bench. They controlled restaurants, the docks, the ships, hospitals, and go on.
It was total anarchy. You knew if you didn't pay on time, they'd bend your leg and stuff it in your pocket.
Okay, and for many years, law enforcement tried to get a handle on it. The story of this ambitious investigation to take down the mafia being told now in the Netflix three-part documentary, Fear City, New York versus the Mafia. I love diving into these topics. Joining us with a preview is former FBI Agent Joe Cantamessa. Good morning to you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
So, you know, Hollywood, it's produced quite a few films about the mob, right? What does this documentary show that you've never actually seen on the big screen yet?
Well, we've generally removed or not shared a lot of inside information for obvious reasons with regard to tradecraft and approaches to actually doing installations. But time has passed, and it's a different model now. So this is just a good take a relook at history.
I guess, you know, for folks who aren't familiar, what was going on specifically in the 70s and 80s, because I've read a lot about the mob in New York City, and it dates way before that, but the 70s and 80s that led to this mafia-esque idea of them controlling so many industries in New York City.
Well, that's the fact of the matter is they did, and there was a surprise even to those of us working these cases, how many of the businesses and unions and other operations that they were actively involved in.
Like what kind of industries?
Labor racketeering is a pretty broad statement with regard to controlling pretty much all of the unions, most of the industries that produce products and goods and services for the public. So there was nothing off the list.
None of the big crime bosses were interviewed for this documentary, which, not for a lack of trying, but it's also not surprising, right? So who do we hear from in this documentary? Because people who are associated are usually very tight-lipped.
Well, certainly. What you did hear in this documentary, aside from some past made people and participants in the organized crime enterprises back then, but you're hearing from several of the management people from the Department of Justice and the FBI and New York City that actually took an active role in a very progressive look at what was happening during that time period. You know,
at one point, one of the people interviewed in this documentary said the FBI couldn't actually keep up with us. Now, did you take that as an insult? Was that true? Did the FBI have a real hard time bringing the alleged mobsters to justice?
It wasn't a hard time, but it was a large undertaking that involved several different squads, hundreds of agents, and countless hours of physical surveillance that led in many cases up to an electronic surveillance. So there was quite a bit of work. It wasn't the only thing going on in New York at the time or in the FBI.
Well,
we had lots of things.
And I got to ask you this, because there's 5 big crime families that people know the names of. You kind of went after all of them at once. Why was it important to bring them all down at the same time?
Well, because of the RICO statute and the first real look at investigating and prosecuting the entire organization, it was necessary to really include every aspect and every family member, or at least the heads of those families.
So have you ever been to, I did a hit in New York on the Mob Museum on the Lower East Side. It's very fascinating to see. Are you like in a bunker? Are you afraid to like walk out and about right now? Because you know the rumor is about kind of if you pull the curtain back on this, they're gonna go after you.
Well, you know, I had a little bit of a different identity back then. I do pay attention. Over the years, of course, there were threats. There would be people that would like to settle the score, so to speak. But for the most part, the technical side of the investigations was really kept out of the mainstream, except for what was actually collected and used during the various prosecutions.
Joe, I am absolutely fascinated with this. I cannot wait to watch it this weekend, the 3-part series now out on Netflix. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Once again, everybody, it is out on Netflix right now. Fear City, New York versus the Mafia, currently streaming on Netflix.